Okay, looks like we're live. Brielle, give me a thumbs up if we're live. We are live. Thanks everybody for joining us for the Regional Housing Trust Governing Board meeting. I will call this meeting to order at 10:30 a.m. and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I would like to please ask our esteemed guest, Senator Anthony Portantino, to lead us in the pledge, if you can do so, sir.
All right, please stand and repeat after me, or repeat with me. I pledge allegiance
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the
the
republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, justice for all.
Thank you very much, Senator, for leading us in the pledge. Can we have a roll call, please? Brielle?
Okay. Chair Liano.
Here.
Vice Chair Shevlin.
Here.
Director Boyer.
Here. Is that me?
That is you.
Okay.
Director Cortez, I don't think is joined us today. Director DeFrink.
Here.
Okay. Director Morales.
Here.
Okay. Director Averill.
Here.
Okay. And Director Finley, I believe, was also not able to join us today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Looks like we have a quorum, and I'll proceed. And because this meeting is conducted pursuant to the governor's order, this meeting is being conducted on Zoom. Instructions on how to give public comment are provided on the agenda packet and on the Regional Housing Trust website. Brielle, do we have any public comment on items not listed on the agenda?
We do not. And with this new webinar format, guests that are here as attendees can raise their hand to make public comment. I do not see any raised hands.
Thank you very much. And I will just at this time take the privilege to change one order of our agenda. And that is, I'd like to move item number 13 immediately to be addressed now so that we can respect the time of our esteemed visitor, Senator Anthony Portantino. Senator Portantino is here to discuss SB 15. And I want to thank you for being with us, sir. You have the floor. Please take it away.
Well, Jed, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for recognizing early on the importance, A, of housing production in California, and B, reaching out on SB 15 and being an early supporter. So I really appreciate your leadership and bringing me to talk to the San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust board today. And obviously so many of my friends and constituents and elected officials that I'm proud to represent are here. So thank you. So SB 15 seeks to help solve be part of the solution to California's housing crisis. As you know, we have to build 180,000 new homes by one estimate annually to meet the demand. We need 1.8 million new housing units, was one of the projections. So and there's been a lot of attempts at production. There's been a lot of attempts to engage local government throughout the years. But one of my frustrations, and I know many of you share, is the way we monetize land use in California. There's always been an incentive to search for retail versus housing because of the way local government is funded. And as a former local government official, I recognize that conundrum. And so BizFed came to me last year and said, hey, what about switching the monetization of land use and creating an incentive for local governments to build housing over retail by estimating what the sales tax would be on dormant retail? So let's start with dormant retail. Why is there retail in our communities that's been vacant? Because shopping trends have changed and more people are shopping online. And certainly the pandemic has exacerbated that situation. And so more and more communities are going to be left with vacant strip malls, which they're hoping to get a big box or a new developer to come in to search for sales tax. So BizFed's idea was, let's take the estimated sales tax that business would have generated if it was still a store, and give 7 years of that sales tax to cities if they build workforce and affordable housing on that site. And I said, what a great idea, because we're using the monetization of land use to do something that we want, and we're doing it in concert and in collaboration with local government, the business community, and labor. And so that's the heart of SB 15. It will estimate what the sales tax would be over 7 years, and we'll give that to the cities in a one-time grant program to build workforce housing. And so cities like it, business community likes it, affordable housing likes it, and it's a very creative idea that came to me from BizFed. So with that, I'd love you guys to support it. I'll take some questions if you have it, but that's the short version of what SB 15 does and why it's getting so much support. Jed, again, thank you for letting me come talk about it.
Good morning, Senator. This is Becky Shevlin.
Hey, Becky, how are you?
Good. Jed just sent me a text, and for everyone online, his computer crashed, and as Vice Chair asked me to step in quickly until he can get back online. So do we have any questions from or comments from our board? I'm not seeing any. I know that we discussed this. I heard Gary, was that you?
Sure. Just to speak up, we've been discussing this. This is the type of incentive that we have needed for a long time. And I'll tell you, on a variety of different committees I'm on, we're unanimously so far supporting this bill. It is just something that we all know the need for housing, and to actually be able to have an incentive instead of a punishment is a great way to look at this. So I would highly recommend that we move forward and support this. But I do appreciate it, Senator, that you coming up with this idea. I know it came from BizFed, but sometimes it's hard in Sacramento to get that train moving in a different direction. But this is definitely the right direction. So I appreciate it.
Right. No, thank you. No, I actually think it's going to work. And we have a companion budget request as well. The bill is the implementation, but we have to make sure it gets funded. And so I'm pushing the budget to include a sizable allocation to showcase that this will work.
I know that Jed is back online, but I did have a question or a comment for you. I know that through the COG, we had discussed this item, and the calculation are using the 7 years prior, the tax base for 7 years prior. The question came up, well, what if it's been sitting vacant and not generating anything for 7 years? So right. A percentage of zero is zero. And so I don't know if you're able to comment on that aspect of it.
Yeah, we're going to fix that. We're going to fix that with an amendment to have the 7 years of its actual prior use, not its dormant status.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. And it sounds like a great and easy fix.
Yeah.
Senator, thanks for fielding that. And Becky, thanks for taking over briefly. I apologize that I got kicked off my machine. I just hope that we're all able to do this in person soon. Again, Senator, I just want to express my own gratitude and echo the comments of both Vice Chair Shevlin and Councilmember Boyer. One comment that came up when we brought it up here in Claremont, and I don't know whether this is something to explore with 15 or if it's something to look at in the future. One of the things that a lot of people are looking at is hotel and motel conversions. And the very first question that city managers are asking when you talk about a conversion is the TOT tax loss. And so I don't know if that's going to fit into this conversation now for 15, or if it's something we keep talking about in the future. But when cities are asked about the possibility of doing a motel conversion for affordable housing, the very first thing that the finance director will ask about is, well, how much does it make a year? And so how much are we losing? Right. So I think we should look into that if there's ever an opportunity to consider that in this or also in the future. But that's just my comment, and I'll open it up to any other board members with questions or comments relating to SB 15 for Senator Portantino. Seeing none, I'll open it up. Brielle, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
Seeing no public comment, I'll gladly accept a motion from the governing board. What's your pleasure?
Becky Shevlin, I'll make a motion to support.
Motion by Shevlin. Is there a second from the board?
Boyer, oh, okay, go ahead.
Morales.
Morales is the second. Brielle, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Chair Liano,
Yes.
Vice Chair Shevlin,
Yes.
Director Boyer,
Yes.
Director DeFrink,
Yes.
Director Morales,
Yes.
Director April,
Yes.
and then I saw Director Cortez joined us. Director Cortez?
Yes.
Okay.
Senator Portantino, thank you very much. And we're happy to
Thank-
unanimously support this.
Thank you, Jed. And just to give a shout out to Claremont was the first city in the San Gabriel Valley to formally take a support position. And so I really appreciate that, Jed, and everybody. And, you know, obviously any of your cities that want to support as well, we're happy to have it. The bill is, the idea, I think, from BizFed is so creative that sometimes smart ideas people look at with a jaundiced eye versus embracing them. So thank you for getting this support today. And it's good to see everybody. And as you said, Jed, hopefully we can do this in person soon.
Thank you again, sir. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
All right. So looks like aside from item 13, which we disposed of rather easily, are there any other requests to reorder our agenda from the governing board? Any other requests to order our agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent calendar. Consent calendar consists of items 6 through 12. Would any member of the governing board like to pull an item for discussion from the consent calendar? I don't see any requests to pull an item. Brielle, do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
We do not have any public comment, and I do not see any raised hands.
Okay, seeing no public comment, I'll bring it back to the governing board. I'll either entertain discussion or a motion on the consent calendar.
Move to approve, Shevlin.
We have a motion from Shevlin. Is there a second?
Second.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Councilwoman Cortez.
Cortez, second. Thank you. Can we have a roll call vote, Brielle, please?
Okay, Chair Liano,
Yes.
Vice Chair Shevlin,
Yes.
Director DeFrink,
Yes.
Director Boyer,
Yes.
Director Morales,
Yes.
Director April,
Yes.
and Director Cortez.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, consent calendar passes. That brings us right along. Now that SB 13 is completed, we will move right along to item 14, Local Housing Trust Fund Project Scoring Guidelines, page 53 of your agenda packet. Brielle.
Okay, thank you. All right, so in July of last year, the board approved program guidelines to establish criteria for evaluating projects. And this was as we were putting together the Local Housing Trust Fund application. And so some of the criteria at the time were project readiness, sub-regional equity, units or beds provided for the San Gabriel Valley, and the value of the project. And so staff worked with Harrison Associates, our consultant team that helped us put together the Local Housing Trust Fund application, which we submitted to the state last August and received an award of $1 million earlier this year. So through that process, we learned a couple of things. The state defines readiness points based on an applicant, which would be the trust's first phase funding process, which is published on its website. So what we've learned here is that the project pipeline will need to be posted on the website to show that the request for funds is greater than the amount of funds that we are requesting. And the highest amount of points you can score in this category, 15, means that the applicant, the least times as much funding as it's requesting, which with the update to the pipeline today, we are well above a 3% or a 3 times oversubscription. Okay, and then the application also requires a minimum of 30% of the supported units to be at 30% AMI or below. So that's an important consideration. So based on the scoring of that recent local housing trust fund application, staff and Harrison Associates developed project scoring guidelines as we look to put together the next application to the state. And as I just mentioned, the project pipeline will serve as that first phase funding process so that we maximize our points in that category. Okay, so then here are the proposed LHTF project guidelines. So the trust will select developments for funding based on the following criteria: number and percentage of units, affordable for households with 30% or less area median income, the project type, so prioritizing new construction over acquisition, rehab, and rental projects over ownership. And this is, again, to maximize our points on the application. The sponsoring jurisdiction's community needs score, which is measured by the percentage of lower income households, 80% or below, paying more than 50% of their household income. So that rent burdened category, most efficient use of trust funds, so a lower per unit funding request, and then readiness to close financing and begin construction. And a new category, contribution of matching funds from the sponsoring jurisdiction. So the trust is able to receive match funds through this program and can provide match funds for funds received from a member city. Okay, and so the trust is able to request up to $5 million through the local housing trust fund program, provided that the trust has $5 million on hand, which is not the case currently. So the second bullet here says that if the trust does not have sufficient matching funds on hand, it can serve as a pass-through entity for a city that is looking to put its own funds towards a project and help them to double their contribution to the project, as long as that project would not make the application not competitive if it was all 80 or 120% AMI units and didn't have enough 30% units. And with that, I will open it up for questions. We also have Dima here from Harrison Associates, who helped come up with these and can help me address any questions you might have.
Governing board, I'll open the floor up. Questions from the governing board. I see a hand raised by Vice Chair Shevlin and Councilmember Boyer. Please, Becky.
Thank you for this report. I did want to, and this goes back to something that was on the consent calendar that I wanted to comment on and say thank you for it. City of Monrovia has added a project for 66 units of affordable senior housing and set aside of 33 units as permanent supportive housing. But I did want to mention, and looking at our chart of our pipeline, project name and number of units is reversed under the Almani projects. And I was just looking at that looking at our projects. And I thought, oh my goodness, Almani has 11,730 units requested. So I just wanted to, that's the name of it. That was the address. I just wanted to point that out. But in terms of the project scoring, thank you for this report. And I'm hoping that we can make sure that we can bring to fruition all these projects. So.
Thank you for pointing that out. I'll definitely correct that before we post it on the website.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Boyer, please.
Well, my question is, the bullet that says efficient use of housing trust funds. I just want to make sure that that covers the value of the projects. And I got to tell you, we've seen some projects proposed that cost up to as much as $1,000 a square foot. And I just think it's really important for us to have in here our ability to not support something if we feel that the cost is too much, even if the housing trust is only approving a small amount. I just think it's important for us to at least be able to have a voice in that conversation. So do we feel that that bullet point would cover that?
I think that it would. Dima, do you have anything to add for the intent behind that?
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. So the inclusion of that criteria, excuse me, the inclusion of that criterion was based on our understanding of the board's preferences to try to create the maximum number of units with the available funding. But I hear what you're saying about high cost projects and wanting to support projects that not only are efficient in using funds from the San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust, but also just in general in the way that they fund their projects. And that is part of the first phase review where we review the pro forma of the projects. So that is something that we review and we pay attention to, and we can incorporate that as well as a separate guideline or incorporate it into that guideline.
Okay, appreciate it. That's the only question I had.
Brielle, to make the facilitating of this conversation a little easier, can we go back to the bullet points? I think it's back one slide that lists the criteria that we're considering. There we go. This takes us back to some of the items we're discussing. Are there any other questions from the governing board? I don't know, Vice Chair Shevlin, if your hand is still raised from the first question, or do you have another?
Oh, I'm sorry, but as long as we're going back here, and I do note, say that I'm going to be a little prejudiced here because it's Monrovia, but our project is for seniors. And if that would also come into play here, I noticed that El Monte is another one that's seniors, but that we are also addressing across the board the need for our senior population as well as other populations, and that there's some equity there as well.
We did not include a specific population set aside other than the affordability at this time. I think it's something that is being considered through our larger strategic planning and funding effort, and definitely something that would make sense if we had more funding available. I think at this time we're just trying to maximize whatever we can fund with our funds on hand. I saw Dima unmute if you have anything to add to that point.
Yeah, I just want to say these criteria or the guidelines identified here are focused on maximizing the Housing Trust's competitiveness for the Local Housing Trust Fund grant program. But certainly other considerations like what are typically called special needs groups, be that seniors, large families, et cetera. Whatever the board's preferences are, we can certainly incorporate that into the review of proposed projects. Of course, like Brielle said, there's a consideration of the funding available, and that certainly limits us to how many projects we can fund. But
well, I suppose that could also fall under the community need if you have a very large community need for senior housing in your community. I don't know.
Yeah, that's not the intent of that specific criteria. Again, that criterion there is specific to the state's grant program and making sure that the Housing Trust is competitive for that program. The way that's defined is purely based on what's called rent burden, or it also applies to ownership as well. But basically, the percentage of income that households are paying on rent or ownership expenses. But again, seniors or students, housing for those groups, we can factor that in if the board would like.
Any other questions or comments for staff?
Looks like Director DeFrank has her hand up.
Yes, I just have one question. When you're talking about the matching funds, if you can clarify for the pass-through part, what type of commitment are you looking for? Is it that it's already been brought to City Council and there's a resolution? Is it how would you determine that, that funding that's been dedicated to a project is eligible for that pass-through?
I think one of the big components would be that it would have to be an eligible source of funding. So home funds or funds that are already designated to be used for housing would be ineligible. But if a city was contributing its PLHA funds to a project, that is an eligible source of match. General funds would be as well. And we would have to work with HCD to see if funds would need to be transferred to the trust or to make sure that we had an agreement written in place that was acceptable to the state so that they would see the projects or see those funds as being tied to the project and being eligible for match. And Dima, feel free to follow up.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. I think, again, just based on the criteria that the state is applying for the regional housing trust, the preference would be to already have the funds transferred to the housing trust. Absent that, a commitment with a resolution or a signed agreement would be the next best thing. And I think anything less than that, from our experience, the state isn't going to recognize that. And so, again, we want to be as flexible as we can, but we have to operate within the state's parameters. And so those would be the kinds of things that would show a commitment of funds.
Okay, so if we were to be dedicating funding to a project, say with the permanent local housing allocation, as part of our process on the resolution to make one of the recommendations be that this funding be eligible for pass through to, that type of, so our resolution reflects that if they apply for these funds or if they apply through the trust, that we would be able to use that resolution as the commitment.
I think what I hear you saying is that the resolution would identify that the funds are being committed to the regional housing trust for a project.
Yeah, as
for
part
use
of
as part of the LHTF program application. Yeah,
okay,
that would be good.
thank you.
Any other questions or comments for staff from the governing board? Vice Chair Chevlin, I do see your hand raised. Is that the holdover? Okay. I'll just take an opportunity and Brielle or Dima, if either of you could chime in. I noticed that on the third bullet point, the sponsoring jurisdictions community need score. I don't need to do a dissection or a deep dive into why HCD scores things the way they do. I'll just trust at its face value that you're analyzing what HCD scores, and then you're applying competitiveness to us. But is it the case, in fact, from what I read here, that then basically HCD figures where is this project going to be built? And then they figure out how many low-income rent-burdened households are in that city. And does that analysis increase the score of a given project? Is that what I'm reading correctly?
Yes, that's fundamentally, that's correct.
And so, okay, I mean, I'll take your word for it, and I trust that your analysis is provided to us only with the intention of making us as competitive as possible. I just wonder then, does that mean that on the converse, that developments that are in higher resource communities that have lower percentages of low-income renters and lower numbers of rent-burdened households, does that mean that those projects under HCD's guidelines become less competitive? Is that the logical follow-through and consequence of this analysis?
Yes, I think that's fair to say that the state's LHTF program focuses more on where communities are rent burdened more so than where there's resource available. But I will say that these aren't make or break criteria. They're sort of weighted. And so it's not that you wouldn't have a project in a resource rich area with a low level of rent burden. It's just that there would be a slight preference given to areas that are rent burdened.
Got it. Okay, that's my only question. Thank you for clarifying that. Are there any other questions or comments from the governing board for staff? At this time, I don't see any raised hands. Brielle, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not. I also do not see any raised hands from attendees.
Okay, no public comment, no raised hands from attendees. I'll bring it back to the governing board. I'll entertain either discussion, further questions or comments, or a motion.
This is Boyer. I'll move to approve.
I have a motion from Boyer. Is there a second?
This is Morales. I'll second that.
Second from Morales. Can we take a roll call vote, please?
Chair Liano,
Yes.
Vice Chair Shevlin,
Yes.
Director DeFrank,
Yes.
Director Boyer,
Yes.
Director Morales,
Yes.
Director Averill,
Yes.
and Director Cortez.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Looks like item number 14 passes. Now we'll move on to item number 15, emergency shelter template agreements, number 57, page 57 in your agenda packets. Brielle.
Okay, so the recommended action here is to authorize the executive director to finalize and execute agreements with participating cities. And so this is an update on where we're at with the emergency shelter programs. So at the February board meeting, the board of directors approved a not to exceed budget for the pilot program, and staff has been working with 4 cities that submitted letters of interest to participate in the program. The template agreement was provided in your packet and serves to identify the particulars of each site, including the location, funding amount, and roles and responsibilities of the trust and the participating cities. And so these agreements will be executed before funds are expended so that our funds are used in a way that brings sites on board. And I have another example here of a non-congregate tiny home shelter. So this was just a quick update. If you have any questions on the program or the agreement that was in your agenda packet, please let me or David know.
Any questions for staff? Seeing no questions for staff, Brielle, do we have any public comment on this item or any raised hands from the audience?
No to both.
I don't see any public comment or raised hands in the attendees list. I'll bring it back to the governing board for questions, comments, or a motion.
I'll make a motion. This is Shevlin, to authorize the executive director to finalize and execute MOAs with participating cities.
I have a motion from Shevlin. Is there a second?
Second from Cortez.
Second, Cortez. Can we take a roll call vote, please?
Chair Liano,
Yes.
Vice Chair Shevlin,
Yes.
Director DeFrank,
Yes.
Director Boyer,
Yes.
Director Morales,
Yes.
Director Averill,
Yes.
and Director Cortez.
Yes.
Okay, great.
All right, that passes. We are moving right along. Now we are at item 16, strategic plan, funding strategy, and housing needs assessment. Page, I'm sorry, I don't have an agenda page number. It is item 16 in our agenda. Brielle, take it away.
Okay, I'm actually going to be handing it off to our strategic planning team, and they will give us an update on where they're at. So I will click through the slides and I'll let the team introduce themselves and get started.
Fabulous. Thank you, Brielle, and thank you, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Sadlon with the strategic planning team, and with me today here are Lisa Varon and Matt Ferris from BAE Urban Economics, and Lisa will be speaking in a bit, and Amory Thomas from the Future Organization. And we're really grateful for the time to be able to update and connect with you today. Next slide, please. So for today, we are going to, this update will address 3 key areas. We're going to start off with our upcoming timeline. We will talk about the results, kind of planning backwards from the results we're aiming for from this process, and take a peek at some of what we've learned through our work so far. Next slide, please. And we'll do one more to look ahead to some of the steps that are coming up. Today, we're sharing some highlights of the work in these 4 areas: the housing needs assessment, the member survey, and the stakeholder interviews, all 3 of which are complete. Best practices in funding sources, data gathering, research, and interviews, as well as research into private fundraising options and possibilities. We're inviting you after today's update to 4 hour-long briefings that are scheduled, as you see, in late April and early May, where we'll share more information in more detail and then also create space for conversation in each of these areas of the research. All of that will come together on June 2nd in the strategy meeting with the board, where we will converge onto, and we're going to take a peek at some of what we're aiming for there. So that's the calendar that we are aiming for. Let's look at the next slide and look at some of the benefits and results that we're working toward from this process. Next slide, please. So you know, and we know together that the trust is experiencing benefits during the planning process by engaging in and among the members, with the community, and then staff and board together aligning on your purpose and direction. These benefits will also extend well beyond the planning period, because in the future you will be able to quickly assess new opportunities based on the agreements that you've built together, decide what to pursue, and often, really importantly, decide what not to pursue, and determine how to use your resources to advance your top priorities. So the plan doesn't lock you in, but really together you're creating guardrails for future decisions. This structured and final plan is really only beneficial, of course, if it's used, and you know that you want a plan that establishes clear and measurable goals. So this unique moment early in the trust's life is the chance to set yourselves up for success with a focused plan. So that's what we're aiming for. So let's take a look on the next slide to be able to think together about what that result will look like, kind of what's the framework or structure that's starting to emerge. And based on the input, we're seeing a strategic approach or framework that has 5 key components. And everything begins with and is grounded in your purpose. And we know that legislatively you were created to fund housing. And the questions that we are pursuing include how to do that best, as well as what else is possible collectively that isn't possible individually. So the member survey gave us a lot of insights on that. The case studies of other housing trusts give examples, and the housing needs assessment identifies those local needs. We know, of course, that the member cities across the trust's membership have a wide variety of housing needs, different resources that you have in place, existing collaborations, policies and procedures internally, and different levels of experience with affordable housing. So the housing needs assessment and the member survey document all of that. And so why don't we take a peek at one bit of information from the member survey that speaks to the purpose piece in particular. So here is, and I hope on your screen you can see this, I'll walk through what the key takeaways from this chart are as a little preview of the kinds of information we get from the member survey. We asked each member to choose up to 3 top housing priorities and provided 8 options that emerged from our earlier work. So in the bars, the purple indicates the number of members that chose that as their top priority. So you'll see by the numbering on the bottom in the first row, the 3 members chose that first item as their first priority. Blue is second priority, green is third. And collectively, you see the overall identification of each of the options. So when we look across the 17 members that have responded, we see a wide distribution across the different purposes around housing priorities. And that really reflects the differences across and among the member cities. There isn't one that really emerges as the top. The item that did receive the most choices from 10 of the 17 respondents is to retain and sustain people who work and or attend school in our community. The next 2 are sustaining the community's character and home values and preserving existing affordable housing. And then when we look at the pair that come in 4th and 5th, we're encouraging housing that reflects the diversity of our community paired with ending homelessness. So when we see the collection of these, the mix really expresses and I think captures much of that challenge that the trust, you're holding and facing in balancing these varying interests in preserving what we have, character, home values, affordable housing, and ultimately in addressing and ending homelessness. So this input helps us identify the questions and the information that we're gathering in being able to name the trust's overall purpose. So I'll pause there for a second before we go on and connect to the rest of the framework, see if anything jumps out there at anyone from what you see there, or any questions or clarifications. I know this is like a high overview. Why don't we go to the next one, Brielle? And be able to see how, when we connect the purpose to the other components of the strategic approach, it's not as linear as it lays out on a single slide, but what we see is that we're also exploring what mix of resources you'll develop to advance the purpose. We know public funds, very much focused on private fund possibilities, land and partnerships very much emerging from the stakeholder conversations in particular. In the program areas, knowing that your core work is on multifamily lending and a mix of other possibilities that we see both your testing and emerging in the work that you're doing, and other examples give us some ideas. Within the multifamily lending, when we look at focus, as you were just talking about, various criteria for being able to choose using data that you have about the community that we've been gathering and will share to be able to determine your focus areas. And then ultimately setting those quantified measurable goals to be able to make sure that you're on track for the results you're aiming for, that then tie back to and reinforce the purpose. So each data briefing around housing needs assessment, members and stakeholders, best practices and funding sources, and the fourth one on private fundraising will give us the information that help us build out this approach. And then let's go to the next one, Brielle, to be able to see how that model, we will at the June 2nd strategic session, bring to you a series of options, a small number of options that are informed by the discussions that we have at those data briefings, so that we can identify a strategic approach that has those components that we just looked at: purpose, resources, programs, focus, and goals. And for each strategic approach, we will then say, how would that happen? How do we make it happen? What is the organizational structure? What are the sources of fundings that we would bring together? What partnerships are key to make that happen? And then ultimately, what are the board and staff roles and composition as you look out into the long-term future? So when we look at each of those possible models, then you as a board will have a clear choice of the direction that you're taking and the results that you're aiming for over the coming years. So with that structure in mind, Lisa's going to give us some highlights of what we've been learning and be able to give you a further sense of what we'll be exploring in more detail in those data sessions. Lisa.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. So I'm going to provide you with a fairly quick preview of what we've learned so far. There's a lot more richness and depth and exciting information that we'll be sharing in the data briefings. And we are also planning on structuring the data briefings so that there is about 20 minutes of conversation and feedback and ideas as well. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So we are taking a look at the San Gabriel Valley at a regional level. And at the regional level, you have some really big goals ahead in terms of the projected future housing need per RHNA. So there are 90,000 units required as part of the RHNA plan over the next 8 years, which is roughly 10 times the number of units that have been delivered in the past 10 years. In addition, in the unincorporated areas of San Gabriel Valley, there's another 30,000 units. So together, that would be close to 120,000 units that would need to be planned for over the next 8-year period. What we can see is that 43% of those must be affordable to incomes below 80% AMI, which puts you at just under 40,000 units in the cities and around 13,000 units in unincorporated. So we're looking at about around 50,000 units throughout San Gabriel Valley at 80% AMI that would need to be built as new, built or purchase and deed restricted as units for affordable housing. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to shift gears for a minute here and just talk about big picture, what we're finding in terms of organizational structure, priorities, and funding. So on the left side of this chart is lending mechanisms, and on the right side of the chart is loan and operating funds. So I'm going to start on the left side and talk about lending mechanisms. So the San Gabriel Valley, the trust fund is a joint powers authority. But there are different mechanisms by which regional housing trust funds, the 5 that we're looking at, lend. Some of them lend as a nonprofit organization, some of them lend as a community development financial institution, and some lend through collaborations with their counties, with CDFIs, or even as collaborations with some of their jurisdictions. We have found in our case study research that the focus for regional housing trusts is on early stage project lending via revolving funds, meaning that they're giving funds for acquisition pre-development and then cycling those funds back in when they're paid back at conversion to construction, cycling those funds back into other projects. There's a tendency to prioritize project readiness, but there is some housing trust funds and housing trusts that offer patient money for projects that are maybe more complicated, might take longer time, and some that are considering perm financing products as well. There's a desire to be aware, flexible, and responsive to the dynamic housing finance environment. As we know, there's a lot of legislation coming down. There's funds at the state level, funds at the federal level, and new tools and opportunities that are coming up. So the word nimble came up quite a bit in our case study interviews and conversations. So moving to the right side of this slide, in terms of sources of loans and operating funds, there are 4 sources. There's member cities, there's public funds, there's private funds, and there's philanthropic funds. So member cities, as you're aware, there are different kinds of arrangements. There's not one arrangement that is the same among the case studies that we've looked at. Sometimes it's a voluntary membership, sometimes it's a required membership fee, but it differs. In some cities, in some regional housing trust funds, there's an understanding that there's a shared regional approach. In some, there is not that understanding. There is definitely guidance from our case studies to continue in the spirit that San Gabriel has been working in, which is that there isn't necessarily a quid pro quo, but there's a desire to work regionally and to try to meet regional needs, and not necessarily have funds boomerang back to specific cities just because they've made a contribution. In terms of public funding, there's a whole wide range, and this is where these two sides of the slide work together, is that public funding, private funding, and philanthropic funding may or may not be available to certain types of organizations, whether it's a nonprofit or CDFI or collaboration. So there may be, depending on the source of funding, there may be restrictions to the kind of entity that get that funding. And that's why you see the 501c3 here with private and philanthropic, is that it is legally and tax-wise allowed for the private sector and philanthropy to donate to government, and to and for that to be considered a tax charitable donation. But private corporations and philanthropy have their own guidelines and their own direction and bylaws that oftentimes don't allow for that unless it's a 501c3 entity. The other piece of information that we found while we were talking is that if a nonprofit board is there, that it does create an opportunity to expand networks for fundraising. So that's an overview of the lending mechanisms and funding sources research so far. We have a lot more depth and a lot more learnings and findings that we're looking forward to sharing in the data briefings. Ready for the next slide. Okay, so household income and market conditions throughout the San Gabriel Valley. Nearly half of San Gabriel Valley households are qualified as low income, earning below 80% AMI. And so on the left-hand side of the chart, the orange represents renter households, the blue represents owner households, and the gray represents all households. And as you can see, owner households tend to be more in the above moderate category. Renter households not. So we generally know this, that renters are majority lower income households and owners are predominantly moderate and above moderate income households. But what we did find is that to rent in the San Gabriel Valley, you need to have an income at market rate rents of more than 70% AMI. And to own in San Gabriel, you need to have significantly more than 120% AMI. So San Gabriel is not an affordable place for people who are low income to rent, and certainly not a place, as you probably all know, where it's affordable to buy. Next slide. So this slide takes a deeper dive into that information and takes a look at cost burden, which is one of the housing issues that comes up, commonly used for an understanding of how deep the housing need is in an area. And on the left-hand side, you can see that almost 75% of low-income renters are rent burden throughout the San Gabriel Valley. Now, the small chart that you see here shows us who are those cost burdened low income renters. And what we're seeing is that about 45% of them are small related families of 4 persons or less, 21% are elderly, 15% are large related, and 19% are other types. You can also see on the right-hand side that there is a fair amount of cost burden among low-income homeowners. And as you might expect, the elderly are a large part of that. As people start to transition to fixed income, their housing cost burden goes up. But also small related families are another group that are that own homes but have a cost burden. Next slide. So this slide, actually, if you could click it just a couple times, Brielle, so that the words come up, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so this slide, these next 2 slides talk about concentration of low-income households in the San Gabriel Valley. And you can see these red boxes show that there are concentrations, some high concentrations of low-income households in certain parts of San Gabriel Valley. So you can see South El Monte, Rosemead, Baldwin Park, some of the edges of Monterey Park is an area that has concentration. Montebello has some concentration, as does Pomona. So there is definitely a sense here that that there's concentration of low-income households. It actually, and you'll see this more in our presentation, but it is kind of the opposite of the high opportunity areas. So there is like a real stark understanding that the high opportunity areas and where low-income households live are not the same. Next slide. So this slide is about the concentration of homelessness throughout San Gabriel Valley, and there are almost 4,000 residents in San Gabriel Valley who are experiencing homelessness, and 83% of those are unsheltered. But what you can see is that 71% of individuals who are homeless live in 5 cities: Azusa, Baldwin Park, El Monte, Pasadena, and Pomona. So there is a real sense that that homelessness is something that some cities are experiencing more than others throughout San Gabriel. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to pause for I'm just going to pause for a minute and round out this conversation by inviting you to please come to the data briefings. If you can't come, I understand we are going to be recording them, but I would like to hear any thoughts or ideas, or we can go back to a slide that that the board is interested in talking about, knowing more about, or just would like to comment on.
So I'll open it up to the board. Any questions or comments from the governing board?
I just have a comment in continuing to reach out. That slide way at the beginning, talking about the responses, they gave a first concern, second and third, the percentages on that. I was just a little, let me see here. That's way there, that one. Because the one that got the largest, well, other than it was a second priority, but in first priorities, that first priority, sustain the community's character and home values. To me, normally that's a comment made like, not in my backyard. I want to keep things status quo. Don't rock the boat. Build it someplace else. I could be wrong, but normally that's a comment that goes along with that line of thinking. So as we continue with our outreach, if, I don't know, really diving into that issue, because we really are trying to, I guess, lift everyone up and not just in certain areas, although like you said, in 5 areas, those are the ones that are most highly, that's with homelessness, are maybe impacted by high rents. But I am a little disturbed about that one comment.
Thank you, Vice Chair Shevlin. Any other questions or comments from the governing board for staff or for our presenters?
Just real quickly, the briefings that are going to be available, are we going to receive links to those? I'm sure we will. Yeah, okay.
Yes. And I can also send out these slides if you'd like to take a look at them before those meetings.
I'd appreciate that. That would be nice to have.
Yeah, thank you. That was actually going to be my ask as well. This is Councilmember Cortez. So thanks, Brielle.
And we'll also share the data briefing materials with everyone. So whether you're able to come for the discussion, which we would love to have happen, but whether you're able to come or not, you'll get the content that will then build upon at the June session.
And do we have times for those? I noticed there were dates, but.
Yes, 1 p.m. It was in the calendar consent item, and I'll now that we approved it, I can send everyone links to keep it on your calendar.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the governing board for staff or our presenters? Seeing none, Brielle, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not. I also do not see any attendee raised hands.
Okay, so thank you very much for that and look forward to our upcoming 4 sessions on the strategic plan. Moving right along, this takes us to discussion item number 17, a legislative update on SB 679, page 65 in your agenda packet. Brielle, please.
Okay, great. So Director DeFrank brought this to our attention, so I'm just going to give a quick update on SB 679. This is for information only. So SB 679 creates the LA County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, an affordable housing solutions agency in Los Angeles County with the ability to raise its own public and private revenue, which bonds are also mentioned in the bill text, and the intent is to create a comprehensive countywide approach to protecting, preserving, and creating housing for working and low-income people. The board will be composed of 13 voting members from LA County, and that was sort of the extent of information that we had at this time. So the COG has taken a watch position due to insufficient information to support or oppose at this time, looking for additional information on the governance structure, how would those 13 voting members be selected, and what would the funding sources and strategy be. And the bill is set for a hearing on April 15th. I think Tim Egan joined us. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add. Otherwise, that's we're just watching this one for now.
Welcome, Tim.
Hi, Jed, how are you? Yeah,
all right, please.
To me, the bill will probably go to Senate Housing Committee. For some reason, they set it for the 15th, but haven't referred it yet. But Brielle's correct. This bill needs a lot more work, especially the board composition and the governance structure and kind of what the author wants to do. What's the intent? It's kind of broadly written right now. More to come.
Thank you very much for that information, Tim. Are there any questions or discussion points? And I see we have a raised hand from board member DeFrank. Please, SB 679.
Thank you, Chair. The reason that I wanted to bring this to the board was just this is being promoted through the United Way. I know that Tommy Newman from Everyone In has, I know that he wanted to have a direct conversation with our mayor. I know he's reaching out to cities, via staff, but wanting to talk to mayors. And so I just wanted to put this on the radar because we don't know much about it, but they're asking for support from our cities. And we don't know, is what this entity would be. Is it look like something that we're doing? Would we then be in competition with them? Those were just some of the concerns, and the fact that it doesn't have a lot of information, but they're asking for support just kind of concerned me. So I wanted to make sure that it was on people's radar as there are outreach efforts being made to bring cities in prior to really knowing what it is that the formation of this agency will actually look like and what they will be doing.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. And are there any other governing board comments or questions on SB 679? Mr. Egan, thank you for the information. I agree that we should keep tabs on this. I did take in a meeting yesterday with staff from the United Way, and I expressed a desire to get more information as well. And as that comes through to me, I'll be happy to pass it on to the group as if I get anything new that would satisfy more curiosity for our governing board. So, but it looks like April 15 are the relevant dates. And Brielle, do we have a governing board meeting May?
We do not. Our next meeting will be June 2nd.
Okay, so Tim, probably this will be more flushed out and this will pass through Senate Housing and Government and Finance, and then we'll have a better picture of what we're considering here.
Right.
Very much. Very, very good. Okay, thank you very much. This was for information only, but Brielle, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not. I also did not see any attendee raised hands.
Okay, seeing no, this is for information only. So just to confirm, David, no action needed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no other information or action relating to this item, I'll move on. General Counsel report.
Thank you, Chair Liano. I don't want to steal the executive director's thunder in case she was going to report on it, but just to let you know, we're hoping that that all the loans will close and escrow will close on the 57-unit West Mission Pomona project. I wanted to give a shout out to Brielle. There are 4 different loans on this project. There's about 8 agreements that have to be entered into. The trust is a party to about 6 or 7 of those agreements. And there's at least 4 sets of attorneys that Brielle has had to deal with. So, trying to get all these cats herded and get everything into escrow has really been challenging. And just during the course of this meeting, there's been about probably 10 to 15 emails relating to trying to get this escrow closed. So anyway, we're hoping, this will be the trust's first loan on an affordable housing project. So we're hoping that this will close by Friday. We'll see. It was supposed to close on Wednesday today. Brielle and I are skeptical that it will close tomorrow when everybody said it would try, but hopefully it'll close at least by the end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And Benita, do you have a raised hand relating to this report, or is that a holdover from the last item?
Sorry, Chair, that's a holdover.
Very good. Are there any questions for our general counsel? Looking for raised hands. I don't see any. Very good. Our executive director is currently away, and thank you, David, for updating us. Do staff have anything to report in her stead?
I think the only other thing I have to add is that Temple City approved joining the trust as an affiliate member at their meeting last night. So they will
All
be joining as
right.
an affiliate
Great.
effective July 1.
Wonderful, Brielle. Okay, that's great. And I don't have anything to report except just a great big thank you and welcome to our new board members who are joining us today for the first time. We don't have a meeting in May, but we will have a meeting in June. In the meantime, we will have 4 sessions relating to our strategic plan. Hope you all can join us. And with that, if there is no other business, we are adjourned. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jed.